Hi, welcome to another edition of the Alan Rosenberg Show. I am back. I got home late last night, last night anyway, from Punta Cana, that's how you say it, Dominican Republic. You can see I got some color, and me and my wife went to go on vacation, and it was my birthday, my 60th birthday. So thanks to all my viewers who wished me a happy birthday, and I did try to respond to comments on my videos when I was away, but obviously wasn't going to do a video. So I'm back last night, and I am today back, and I decided to do kind of a cool video. I think it's cool, and I hope you'll think it's cool, and maybe give you some thought as well. And what you see behind me are the first 20 albums that I ever owned. That's right. So if you're familiar with my channel, I started my database and really started collecting records and categorizing it and cataloging it in 1973. That's my ground zero. But what you see here are the first 20 albums I ever owned, and they started in 1970, 71, 72, and 73 is in here as well. These were the first 20 albums I owned. I got them as gift from my parents. And in 1973, I remember the Stones and Zeppelin, Houses of the Holy, and 2 Elton John albums, and Band on the Run. I definitely bought those with my own money. I remember that clearly. So let's dig into it. If you're new to my channel, please hit subscribe. Please hit like. Check out my other videos. But without further ado, let's check out the first 20 albums I ever owned. So I'm 60 years old. I was born in 63. So some of these albums I was like 7 or 8 years old. Maybe you have some information on some of these. So I'm going to start with some that I really, really remember when I was really young, like this one. And this is Diana Ross. And this was a TV soundtrack, Diana. And it was Diana Ross and the Jackson 5 and Bill Cosby and Danny Thomas. And this was the soundtrack to a TV special that she did. And I remember watching it on TV. And I was like, man, I got to get that. And I guess my parents probably went out and bought me this vinyl record. I've never seen it on CD. I don't know if it ever came out. It was on Motown. This came out 1971, I believe it was. And it's fun. There's some comedy stuff on there. Diana Ross, Jackson 5 tracks. And this is the original album. That was definitely one of the first ones. 1971, so I would have been 8. I mentioned this in another video. I love this album. Christy is the name of the band. Yellow River. Yellow River was a huge hit. And this is a great, great album that I've never seen on CD. I know it came out on CD, pretty expensive at one point, but I don't have it on CD. And Yellow River. This is a really good album. And this also is probably around 70 or so. I'd have to look in my database. Christy and Yellow River. This is an album that I always liked, and I don't know anything about this band. This is not Mahogany Rush, Frank Moreno. This is a band called Mahogany, and this was a demonstration record not for sale on Epic Records, and it's like a Chicago blues by these 4 kind of white guys, but it's a good record. I remember it and playing it a lot. And I remember looking on Discogs at one point. It was going for a lot of money. And it's got the inner sleeve. The inner sleeves back then were great because it would show the other albums that were coming out at that time. And this was Mahogany on Epic Records. Now, why do I have this album? And I've told the story about how I got into Genesis, Charlie Daniels later on. My dad had a friend when I was a kid who worked in the music business, Buddha Records. And every once in a while, I think like 2 or 3 times in my lifetime when I was a kid, he brought home some records from Buddha Records, their distributor, Famous Charisma, Kama Sutra. And me and my sister, who's 4 years older, we used to go through them and divvy them up. She would take one, I would take one. She would take one, I would take one. And that's where this Mahogany came from. So it's not a band that I ever heard of. And that's how I got into Genesis. If you are familiar with my videos, you've seen these. These are first pressings of Foxtrot and Nursery Crime. And these are in the top 20 first albums I ever got as well, ever owned. And that's because this came from Buddha Records. This was on the Famous Charisma label, but they distributed it. And so I was into Genesis really like then, 1971, 72, 73, and they were virtually unknown, except for amongst, certain people. There's look at the record label's misprinted there. See? The label's misprinted. That's what it was supposed to look like. So this was first pressings of Nursery Crime and Foxtrot, and that was in the top 20. So the reason why I chose these records when my father brought them home was because of the artwork. I never heard of Genesis. My sister never heard of Genesis at the time. But I chose these because of the artwork. Same thing with this one. Let's see if anything falls. So this is the Yardbirds, right? This album must have came out around 70 also. So when I got this album, I never heard of the Yardbirds. And this is a 2-album compilation featuring performances by Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, and Jimmy Page. And this is basically the history of the Yardbirds. And same thing. Great artwork, right? Isn't that awesome? And I also chose this record because of the artwork. Didn't know who the Yardbirds were at the time. And this was from Epic. Amazing compilation this is. And another one that never came out on CD. But this was how I discovered the Yardbirds. So I was, whatever I was, 8, 9 years old. And my sister was kicking herself later on when we figured out who they were. Same with this. So this was Redbone. This was also on Epic. And this was an album called Potlatch by Redbone. Of course, Redbone got really famous with their hit Come and Get Your Love. And that's why this is a demonstration album, a promo. But this is a great album. Maggie, light as a feather, Alcatraz. I haven't heard this album in 30 years, and I could still remember like every note. I used to play these albums to death, because back then you didn't get a lot of albums, so it wasn't like today where you get so much volume. That's why I forced myself to listen to albums 5 times and then keep them and put them in the database. But back then, man, I used to listen to these albums. I knew every damn note. So this is a cool inner sleeve, and inside Epic, and they're talking about Johnny Winter and the Everly Brothers and Little Richard, whoever they were putting out at that time. Shuggy Otis. So this was also one of the first 20 albums that I ever owned, not because I went out and bought it, but because I got it from a stack of records, and me and my sister divvied them up. Same with this. This is a really cool album. This is Johnny Winter, and this is a thing called First Printer, another promo copy. And this is his really early recordings. This is a lot of it's kind of melodic. It's bluesy. Great stuff. I love this album. Coming up, another album I played to death, man. Oh my God, love this one. And so this is pretty cool. Look at what I hand wrote on the cover. Can you see that? It says, "To school today." And I remember bringing this to elementary school. So I must have been in like 3rd or 4th grade, and the teachers were like, you could bring music in. And they're bringing in like Marlo Thomas, Freddie B, you and me, and I'm bringing in Johnny Winter, First Winter. Yeah, it's a little ahead of my time. But this is on, there's the inner sleeve for Buddha Records right there. Talking about, what they had coming out, Melanie. And of course, I had a lot of that bubblegum pop. And there it is, First Winter on Buddha Records. Needs a good cleaning. Really cool album. So these are amongst the first, all of these are the first 20 albums that I ever owned. Here's another guy that was on Buddha. And I've mentioned this guy, pretty unknown, Michael Wendroff. And this was the gate sleeve of this album. And this is another album that, God, I just played this. He's like a singer-songwriter, but look at the studio musicians he had. The top of the line, man. Rick Marotta and David Spinoza. And these guys were like legendary. The Brecker Brothers. And great songwriter. And this is just a great album. Never put out on CD, at least here in the United States anyway. Another really good record. And then a little review from Billboard magazine, Michael Wendroff at the bitter end. So that's Michael Wendroff, another from that. So you're like, well, did you ever buy anything at that time? And yeah, I did. So you always started off with the Beatles, and my first two Beatle albums that I ever bought with my own money, the Beatles 62, 66, and then, of course, the Blue Album 67 to 70, which is long gone on vinyl, and then I got it on digitally remastered CD, but I still do have the vinyl version. For some reason, I got rid of the blue vinyl version. And Elton John, God, I loved these albums. Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player. I remember buying that one, and don't have the vinyl anymore, but the vinyl was great. It came with like a booklet inside with beautiful artwork. I think it had the lyrics for all of these songs. But of course, down the line, I got rid of the vinyl and got the digitally remastered CD with bonus tracks. And this was, God, that I played Don't Shoot Me to death. And of course, same year in '73, he put out Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, certainly one of the greatest double albums ever made. And here's the digitally remastered CD on one CD. But that had beautiful packaging also. Elton at his prime in '73. This was the first Rolling Stones album I ever bought the day it came out in 1973. So I've done videos on Goat's Head Soup. It's a really special album. And here's your first pressing, man. This was the day it was released. And I must have 8 different copies of Goat's Head Soup now. I did a video on it. I think it's the most underrated Rolling Stones album. There's the original skate sleeve. And though it sold a lot, and even the Stones don't give it the due. Well, now they make it the big deluxe edition. But there's the original Goat's Head Soup, and you can see the holes because I used to have it hanging on my wall. And then I got another copy of it down the line. So Goat's Head Soup, my first Stones album that I bought when it first came out. The first Stones albums I ever heard was Sticky Fingers and Hot Rocks. My sister had those. So that is Goat's Head Soup. And then the first Zeppelin album I ever bought, the day it came out, was Houses of the Holy. And this is, of course, the CD version, the remastered version of it, one of many. But of course, I had the vinyl, and I remember the vinyl was like this. It didn't say Led Zeppelin Houses of the Holy. It had a belly band that wrapped around. And Houses of the Holy didn't get great reviews when it first came out, but I remember I loved it. My sister loved it. We just played Houses of the Holy to death, and now, of course, it's a certified classic. But I love the Houses of the Holy. Great, great album from '73. As is this, my first McCartney album I ever bought when it came out, and that was Band on the Run. An amazing, I still think it's his best album. And of course, this was one of the multiple versions that he's put out since. This was a 25th anniversary. But of course, I had the vinyl version of that, and that was great. And this actual little box did a good job, because in the vinyl version, when it originally came out, it had this. I remember that. I had like a poster. And they did a reproduction of it for this 25th anniversary CD box, but I remember it well on the vinyl version. And a couple more. This was a really special album. You know these are going to fall. This was a great collection called Dick Clark's 20 Years of Rock and Roll, 30 original hits. And this covered the gamut. And really nice packaging. The inner gatefold had all the news stories. And look at this selection of tracks, total history, 20 years of rock and roll, right? So it goes from 53 to 72. And a lot of hits. Melody, Candles in the Rain, and Hang On Sloopy. And just a wonderful collection that was put out on Buddha Records, no less. And it actually came with this 20 years of rock and roll yearbook. So you can go year by year, what was going on and the great hits of the time. And this is when, vinyl was real nice with this. So that was a really special, great collection that I loved and still love. Dick Clark's 20 Years of Rock and Roll, one of my 21st albums. And this one as well, this is a guy named Chip Taylor. And this was now called Gasoline. This was also on Buddha, so I must have got this one for free, divvying it up with my sister. But this album was kind of famous because it's got a really famous song on this that's been covered 1,000,000 times, and it is the second song on side 1. Do you see it? Yep, the original version of Angel of the Morning on this album from Chip Taylor. And really fine record, really fine songwriter, and that was one of my first 20 albums I ever owned. Back in the day, Sean and I was a pretty big band, and this was also a Buddha Records Kama Sutra release, and this was a 2-record live set and no gatefold. But this was great. I loved Sean and I remember seeing him at Westbury Music Fair when I was a kid. It was just great. And they had a TV show, a little bit cheesy, but they were great, really great band. And I still listen to them every once in a while when I feel like hearing some 50s hits. But this was a really fun album. The Golden Age of Rock and Roll, one of the first 20 albums I ever owned. One more left. And this was a Broadway show that I remember my parents took me and my sister to see. And it was called Seesaw, starring Michelle Lee and Ken Howard. And I remember there was a scene. Tommy Tune had these really long legs, and he did this really long stretching thing. But this was a soundtrack to the Broadway show. And I remember after seeing that show, I was like, oh, please get me that soundtrack. And they did. So my parents didn't have a lot of records. They had a small stereo system, but I remember they had Frank Sinatra and some great classic Broadway hits like Man of La Mancha and West Side Story that I grew up listening and buying. West Side Story, Man of La Mancha, some other ones that I wound up buying as well. But this was one that they got me because I loved the show, Seesaw. So there you have it, a little bit something different. The first 20 albums that I ever owned. Either I bought them, like Goat's Head Soup, Led Zeppelin, Elton John, that was around 73, or they were given to me, courtesy of Buddha Records and Epic Records from my father's friend, like the Yardbirds. It's kind of interesting that you could see I got into these bands really young without even knowing who they were. Remember, no internet back then. It was just looking at the graphics saying, that looks like a cool record, I'll take that one. And then my sister would take a different one. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane. The first 20 albums I ever owned. I'd like to know if you remember the ones that you got when you were first a kid. Were they rock and roll like this? Or was it the Partridge Family? I never had any of those. But certainly a lot of people did. Or Free to Be You and Me. I know my wife had that record. That's about it. Thanks for checking out the channel. Please hit subscribe if you like it. Check out my other videos. More will be on the way. And as I always like to say, stay safe and stay healthy out there. Keep rocking. I will see you the next time. And thanks for your support and your comments and watching my channel and helping it grow. Man, I appreciate it, and I hope you're enjoying it. Thanks so much.